Arianthe for all that she does.
Oh, thank you. That was quite an introduction, Candace. My goodness gracious, I hope I don't disappoint you. Anyhow, one thing I want to do is, I've lived in Routt County for 53 years. It's hard to believe, but there it is. And what was interesting is when I came to Routt County to be with my wonderful husband, Paul Stettner, he came with a barn. Imagine that. And that's when I started learning more about barns and getting curious about them. And so I wrote my master's thesis in historic preservation about barns. I did lots of articles and presentations about barns. And so here I am sharing some of the things that I've learned about barns in Routt County mostly with all of you. But first I want to know, in this group, who owns or has owned a barn? Raise your hand. I love it. I love it. And where are you from? Are you Colorado barn owners or from out-of-state barn owners? Okay, great, great. And then the rest of you are in-state barn owners, and you will appreciate some of these little statistics that I pulled together in preparation for today's talk, which is that the USDA Census of Agriculture happens every 10 years. It happens like the results show up, so we should be getting one in 2027, but I have the results from 2017 and also from 2007. And at that time, the first question was ever asked about, do you own a barn over 50 years old? This was, or what it was a barn that was built before 1960. And the people who were asked that question were owners of working ranches. So these weren't hobby ranches. These were ranches that had more than, I believe, $1,000 of income from agricultural products. So in 2007, in the state of Colorado, there were 8,331 barns on working ranches. 2007. In 2017, there were 6,203 barns on working ranches. So we have lost in the state of Colorado over 2,100 barns. And so think of that cultural landscape feature that we are losing. Interestingly, historic Routt County in the early 2000-2001 did what we called a barn survey. And we worked with the community, the Colorado cattlewomen and other ag producers and the extension agent. Do I have to end already?
No, I can turn it off.
By the way, let me know when I'm talking too long, if I overstate.
We have to save time for the quilters.
Oh, well, they're in here. You're gonna love it. So anyhow, so in this survey in 2007, they counted 149 barns in Routt County built before 1960 on working ranches. Historic Routt County had done its own survey of barns, and we learned that many of these agricultural operations had more than one barn on them. And that is because a lot of them combined homesteads, or in those days when barns were smaller, they could be moved. It's like this barn over here, they're not using it, I'll take it over here onto my ranch. And so it was a great form of recycling. And I think that that makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, the 2017 census, I couldn't drill down into those numbers to find out how many barns have been lost. But I think we all can envision some of the barns that we have lost since 2007, whether it's been by fire or whether they've collapsed or just plain been torn down. So it's really a treat to I'll take you on a sort of a visual road tour of some of our Routt County barns, some that are here with us, some that are celebrated, some that have unfortunately suffered the ravages of time or disappeared, and some that are celebrated in these quilts that are on display in the hallway. So hooray to the quilters who have shared these barns, because some of them I don't even know about, and I know about a lot of them. So we'll have to do a show and tell afterwards. Anyhow, I wanted to share that, and then I wanted to talk just a little bit about barns before we go on our road trip. One thing I did recently was, actually I did it in 2010, how time flies. I went to the National Barn Conference. Who knew that there was such a thing? In Kansas, in eastern Kansas. And it was pretty amazing to me how different the barns are there and how different the barns are in the Midwest. And I think these barns, and every barn that we see reflects the agricultural operation of the area, the resources that are available, and the skill set and resources of the people who built these barns. So I'm going to, just as a point of contrast, show you a few of the barns that I photographed in Kansas, and then we'll go into the Routt County barns. And so I think right there is a barn that looks familiar, and I want to just point out some different material things in barns for you to take a look at as we look at these slides. And that is that barns reflect their location. So here, this barn has milled lumber. It obviously has not been used, but this wood has seen the test of time. It was painted white at one point. I think the barn is just a feature on the landscape, but it is milled wood. Next slide. Then we go to a nearby barn. There were no trees. In this eastern Kansas landscape, there were rolling hills. There was a lot of flint, interestingly, and there was some beautiful stone and people who knew how to work the stone. And so there were a number of stone barns. That was the only photograph I took that was worthy of sharing with you, but it's pretty interesting. And then we have round or octagonal barns. And there are none of these in Colorado. I have a picture of one made out of adobe in New Mexico, of all places. And this is one, of course, from Kansas that is very elaborate. It has a cupola, it has a side gable, it's in really good shape because the people care for it, but it's not used. And it turns out that these octagonal or round barn designs weren't very practical. It seemed like on the drawing board for the people, and a lot of these ideas came from extension agents who were trying to help farmers, agricultural operators build better barns and have more efficient operations. The round barns sounded good, didn't work. And I don't know, it depended on which way the cows were pointed, I think. So, at any rate, this is just some of the amazing interior structure of that barn that is still standing and still in good shape, and it just looks like a puzzle. And then here we have the last barn from Kansas, which is sorely neglected. But this one is interesting because it shows changing times. There was a point at which the government said, for dairy operations to be sanitary, you gotta have concrete block or brick or something where the cows are. They can be washed off better, it's easier to take care of, etc. So this farmer, this operator, built and again, it's hard for me to tell from the photograph, it looks like big brick or big concrete blocks, and maybe you can tell better, it's not log, But at any rate, that was this farmer's response to answering that requirement. But it was too much to keep up that barn, obviously. And so that barn is going the way of the dodo, unfortunately. But now we'll talk about the barns in Routt County. And I think, the very first barn that we'll see, I believe, is this one. And this is probably the barn that started so many things here in Steamboat Springs. It was built in 2 stages, really. It was built first in the 20s, I believe, and I should know this stuff because I did the historic designation of it, but all these days sort of mashed together in my head. It was when agriculture and, interestingly, dairy was a big deal in Routt County in the early 1900s. Why? Because before 1909, really, there was no way to get milk here. If you wanted milk, you had a cow. And there were a lot of people who had cows and dairy barns. So this was first built as a dairy barn, and then after the train came and customer habits changed, people stopped having cows, they moved more into cow-calf operations. And so the barn in the middle, the interior of the original, was built by J. Kelton. Some of you who are locals know of J. Kelton when he was 17, and he built just a summer job barns. And we'll see another J. Kelton barn in a little bit, but he was just a teenager when he was helping to build this barn. He became our local sheriff for many years, and I think he is no longer with us. But at any rate, and then we'll go back just a smooch, because hidden behind that chute is the wing on the side where there were heifers. You don't really see it here. But the other thing I want to say about this barn is I didn't have a picture, but most of you are familiar with that iconic image of 2 riders on horses plowing through the deep snow in front of this barn with skis across the saddle lawn. That was 1971. That iconic image really became Steamboat's brand. And I don't think any of you will deny that. But that brand so captured the imagination, first of the ski industry, showing the unique combination of a genuine, authentic agricultural community and the recreational sport of skiing. I have seen that poster when visiting friends in Europe. These were friends who didn't know me. I mean, they just had it there. And I'm wondering how many of you have seen that poster in other countries? Isn't that neat? I mean, how's that image captured the imagination? So, of course, this place matters. This place is important to our history, to our culture. It symbolizes so much. And this barn was in severe, it looks better now, but it has been restored to look like an old barn. So inside there is, it's kind of like all of us that are bionic with these parts. We look natural from the outside, but you don't know what metal is lurking inside until you go through the TSA scan. So that's what's happening with this barn. It is, yes.
Will you say the name of it and its location?
Yes, thank you. Well, this barn is often called the Moore Barn, although he did not build it, but he owned the property for a long time. It's called the Steamboat Barn, and I think that is the name that most of us will recognize it. But at the time it was built, it was owned by the Yock family, Y-O-C-K. And if you go to the site, which is just off of Pine Grove Road, it used to be very visible as you drive down Pine Grove Road. Now you have to go slow, and then you drive up this little road to Barn Village, and you'll see it, and there's a little walking path there, and an interpretive sign that will help you know more about it. So that is that barn. Now, moving on to the next barn, I'm going to show you some of the barns that are early Routt County barns. And one of the things that that previous picture shows and this picture shows is when Routt County was first settled, picture 1870s, 1880s. No railroad. How did people get here? Horse and wagon, or foot, or skis. And so what did they use to build things? Well, they used the local wood, usually on their land. And so this old log barn is on the road, the little Pleasant Valley back road, if some of you know that. It doesn't have a name, it's decrepit, but the interesting thing about this barn is that if you actually, this is the one that's near Stagecoach. So if you look at the entrance to Stagecoach State Park, and you go down that drive, and you'll see a couple of collapsed buildings. Voila, that's one of them. So what that shows, however, and these are the clues in the landscape. If you look closely, it has V notches at the corners. So the notch type indicates the training or the experience of the person that built the barn. Now, can I remember at this moment what the V notch history is culturally versus the square notch or the saddle notch? Not at the moment, but but what it, you know, there are books that explain this history, and so you can tell along Pleasant Valley, most of those people were Swiss, so they built barns using their traditions, and we'll see another one. But anyhow, this is a V notch. You can see where the notches are for the second floor, and of course, the barn hasn't been used for decades. It's collapsing in on itself. Then we'll move to the next barn. This barn is gone, and this is an agricultural outbuilding. There used to be a historic ranch tucked away on a back road at the base of Ravier's Pass. All those buildings were demolished, and it's now a private fishing retreat. So I don't know how you can get there, but square notches. So it took some craftsmanship to do that, to make those joints. But those times are gone. And that barn and all the other buildings, the agricultural buildings, are also gone. So then we'll move to the next one. This is still a working ranch on Yellow Jacket Pass. And these people had a wonderful collection of wood barns that they maintained for many years. However, change is upon us, and Morton Buildings has struck. And so we now have these beautiful wooden barns have been replaced with metal buildings. I didn't take a picture of them. So then, this barn is a historic barn. It's called the Priest Creek Barn. So it's off of Highway 40, going towards Ravier's Pass. You take a left onto some small country road, and there is this large, well-kept barn with vertical siding. So it's not a real agricultural operation, but it's more like a hobby ranch. Well cared for, but you know, it's the 21st century version of how we take care of our barns. So there might be another picture of it. And then here's another good one. This is the Stanko barn. And the Stanko family are historic treasures. They keep our history alive. They keep access to it. They remember it. They're wonderful sources of reference, and they have this unique barn with a hay hood. It's the only one I know of in this part of Routt County. However, if you ever drive down to McCoy, on the left side as you're going south, you will see another barn with a hay hood. Those are more typical of the Midwest. So I don't know if the Stanko family built this barn, or Did they?
Mhm.
So I wonder if they have Midwestern roots or not. Anyhow, there it is. It's a hay hood, and you know, it protects that. And of course, here is, but I can't read who quilted this, but there is the barn.
Nancy Wilson.
Yes, celebrated in a quilt.
Yeah.
And it's just wonderful to see it, and you know, these are part of our collective history, these places that mean so much to us. So, moving on, here is another barn. This is South County Road 33, and it shows different construction for different needs. I did not know when I moved to Routt County in 1971 what a granary was and why they are built differently than other agricultural structures. So when you look at this barn, it looks like it had multiple purposes. You can see the part with the ribs, the verticals on the outside instead of the inside. Well, that's not a building built wrong or inside out. It's built so that that smooth wall on the inside, that is where a little room inside where the grain is stored. And if you had these ribs on the inside, well, the mice and the little rodents getting that grain would just have a field day. You know, it was like Costco for mice. So anyhow, this part of the barn is a granary, the middle part, and then the side part might have been animal stalls, but there are no windows. So it just might have been, you know, stalls or places where they hung tack or something like that. But it's a multi-use structure. It's pretty large, and I don't know whose barn it was. And then this is one of the wonderful barns that we lost. It's a crummy photograph, but some of you will recognize the Warren Ranch barn up Elk River Road, and it burned down several years ago. So that's the best photo I could find. And then, relating to that, these barns are on Routt County Road 14. And they used to be owned by Molly Orr, who passed away. The property sold. Before that, these barns were part of the Larimore family, but not, there was a father and son Larimore. The father's name I cannot remember, but these are the barns associated with his property. Very close to the railroad, a variety of sizes and shapes, well maintained. We'll see another Larimore barn in a minute. So, but you can see, another thing I'll point out to you, not yet, is the type of roof. So there are several types of roofs that you will see in barns here. One is the gable barn, the gable roof. It's just a straight line from the very top all the way down to the bottom, and then it goes over the sides. And then when people think about it or know about the tradition, the sides usually extend beyond, or the end of the roof extends beyond the side of the barn, so when the snow slides off, it doesn't hit the walls of the barn. So anyhow, that's the gable. And we'll see sort of the next one is a barn that Historic Routt County helped to restore. It's got a slight double gambrel roof, which is the double pitch gable. So it kind of goes like this and then another pitch. It's very subtle, but this was those of you who know the Harold family that lived down in South Routt in Arianthe, this was like a grandfather or the first Harold family member that came to Routt County. This barn is on the Catamount Ranch, so it's not available to the public, unfortunately. But at any rate, what it shows is how barns evolved. You see the logs on the bottom, and then you see the milled lumber on top for the hay loft. And during the time of hay production, getting a lot of hay stored to protect it from the weather was a big deal. And barn shapes evolved over time as materials changed in order to accommodate hay. And we have to think about what happens with technology, because when hay was first cut in Routt County and in agricultural areas, it was loose. So there were hay wagons, and the hay was cut loose, thrown onto the wagon, brought up in big chunks, and tossed into the barn. And I'm sure many of you remember or have heard of people jumping into the piles of hay, from the hayloft. Great fun. Then things started to change. And as mechanization changed, barns changed. Because you could have a lot of loose hay in a hayloft. But once you started getting those 100-pound bales, and you could start getting bales, well, you throw those in a hayloft and you might lose the floor, because the floors weren't built to accommodate that type of weight. So we'll see how this changes over time. We'll go to the next slide. So this is a great, wonderful story and barn. Here you can see again the kind of gambrel roof, and then as operations changed, the wings on the side for the heifers and the additional stalls. Some people call this style of barn a western barn because it has those wings to it, as we call it. This is at the bottom of Yellow Jacket Pass. And how many of you knew Benita Bristol? So Benita was a dear friend and a neighbor when I lived out there. And so we had lunch together shortly before she passed away, and I was talking about barns and her barn. And she said that this is where she grew up, at the base of Yellow Jacket. And the story she told me was that in the 20s, the Depression, she said there were a lot of people with no money just walking through the roads, through the countryside, just trying to get from one place to another. And she said her father, who was Grouse Creek Jones, who is a notable name in Routt County history, he would often let these people, the wanderers, or tramps as she called them, that was the word, or hobos, in the day, just sleep in their barn. And she remembered as a little girl, a fellow came by and said, "Can I sleep in your barn?" And he said, "Yes, but don't light a fire, even though it's cold, don't light a fire." Well, he lit a fire. And Benita was really little, I think she was younger than Hazy. So Hazy took her out, the barn caught on fire. And Hazy took her out to see, as a little girl, to see their beautiful barn ablaze. And I don't know what happened to the man who caused it, but they lost their barn. This barn dates from the 30s. They rebuilt it. So this is not the historic barn, but it is a historic barn because it dates from the 30s. So these things, history moves along. And but I'll never forget that story of Hazy holding her sister, and they're just looking at this barn ablaze, and they could do nothing about it. It's gone. So that's, these little vignettes. Here, many of you know this barn. This is the Fetcher barn on the Fetcher Ranch. Another barn built by Jay Kelton when he was a teenager or a young man. And of course, this barn is actively cared for and in use, and you can see the hay hook hanging out above the barn. And there was some story I have yet to verify. Why are barns painted red? Well, the story I have heard is the fact that that type of red paint or oxide or stain was very inexpensive. So maybe some of you know more about that than me, but that was an explanation I've gotten several times. So anyhow, there's that barn, and here we have it memorialized in a lovely quilt. So it's just really fun to see the stories of these barns translated into just delightful memories, delightful images. So next barn is the barn that Paul brought with his dowry. Of course, we no longer own this property, but while we were there, the barn, as many barns, was suffering from neglect. And so Paul totally rebuilt the foundation. And this is something called a bank barn, and we'll see a couple of them. A bank barn is a very practical way of building on a hillside. So at the toe of the hillside, you have this part of the barn that opens out into the corral so that the animals can get out and you have the access to the flat ground. On the upper side of the barn, the higher up on the hillside, you have access to the hay loft. And so you don't have these weird stairs. Nature forms the stairs for you. And so you can kind of sense the slope of the hill behind Paul, and then the access to the hayloft area. And the hay hook isn't there because the previous owner of the barn wanted it. He said, "Can I come and get the hay hook and the this and the that?" So
They're
we were-
very popular in Pennsylvania.
Oh, really?
Yeah, very popular.
Yeah, well, Pennsylvania has so many hills, it makes total sense. I mean, where are you going to find enough level ground to build a barn, a standalone barn? Thank you, that's great to know. So, moving on, here is another little bank barn. This one would be familiar to you. I don't know who owns it, but this has a concrete block base, the first level, and that was the response to creating a dairy barn. And then the modest sort of gambrel roof, and then the access to the hay loft is on the other side. So, but if you drive on Highway 40, I think it's before Milner on the right side, you'll see it there. And I think it's not actively used, but I'm not the one to say. So, and then here is, the next one is a barn, I'm sorry to say that we have lost. And you know where Casey's Pond is, and where the pond was on one side, there was this beautiful miniature barn that was an ice house. And we tried our darndest to save that barn. And Casey's Pond didn't want it. They said, no, it's going to interfere with this and that. The city said, well, no, we don't want it. And so we found someone to take it, but then the place fell through, or when they picked it up, it fell apart. So there it lives in posterity, an image in our hearts, but not before us. So, but that was, and then those of you who remember it just was such a treasure, such a lovely place to see as you drove up Walton Creek Road, but it's gone. So, moving on, here is another interesting barn. This is somewhere up Elk River. I didn't take a note, but what you'll see in the not great photograph is this is a square notch barn. And so you'll see that in the corners. It's all log, gambrel roof. Hard to tell if it's actively used. Many barns today are used for storage. They're not used, for their dairy cows or, heifers or goats or who knows. Maybe they're used for alpacas, but I don't know. And then moving on to Hilton Gulch, here is a restored barn that is log on the bottom. I couldn't get a good picture. It looks like saddle notches, very closely done. But this is not a first generation pioneer barn. This is a probably 1920s barn. And it has, you can see how they extended the original logs up to get more hay in the hay loft. So hay was a big deal. And so when the first settlers came here and they discovered there was no feed for their animals in the winter, they learned very quickly to start gathering hay. And we do have great quality hay here in Routt County. So that became a thing. Okay, moving on. Here some of you, and this is in honor of Moose. This is Moose Barrows on his property a couple of years ago with his wonderful barn, and so very proud of it. He used it to store motorcycles. Motorcycles and tools and things like that, and he just loved his barn. So there we have a great picture of him, and a neat check. This is a barn. This is probably one of the newer barns, well maintained. It's on 131. It used to be part of the Willie property. I don't know if any of you know her. I haven't done my research on this, but it's well taken care of, and actually these people might have alpacas. So you just never know who's going to make their home in a barn, besides the mice. But there it is, and then going the next step. This is called today the Humble Ranch. But years ago, it was called the Grant Ranch. And this was owned by the Newell Grant family. Very well maintained, huge cattle operation. And they had many different outbuildings, well maintained. And the Grants ended up selling, probably in the 90s. I can remember you and I worked on that whole
96.
96, yep. That was a big project. It went from private hands and then into a humongous community partnership with multiple partners that the city negotiated, thanks to Linda and State Parks and DOW and many, many people, so that huge ranch ended up, gotta be quick, ended up, a lot of it is open to the public. And I don't know what the status of the ranch headquarters is now, but part of it became the little Hutchinson Ranch, or the Legacy Ranch on Highway 40. No more barn there, but a great public resource for all of us. And next slide is, of course, a beautiful quilted rendition of that. So, moving on, this is another iconic barn in Routt County, and it shows in a way the difference between barns that were created here versus in like West Routt County versus the more sort of challenging weather areas of Pleasant Valley and South Routt County where the climate was more harsh. This is the Carpenter Ranch barn. It may be a timber frame barn, and there are not that many, if any, others in Routt County, because this barn was built by probably in 1900 or so, using the local wood, which was cottonwood of all things. So who would have thought of a cottonwood barn, but there it is. And it's well maintained, and it has the gambrel roof, and then it has these extra additions for gear and heifers and what have you. And then nearby is the one recent decent picture I have of Hereford Haven. This was more of a outbuilding shed. The main barn, unfortunately, I didn't have a big picture of, but these West Routt County barns were usually large, white frame. Many of them had cupolas, and they reflected the big grain growing operations of Western Routt County that you just couldn't have in other parts of the county. So, okay, continuing on, here is a barn that is near the Sleeping Giants School. I don't believe it's used. It's owned by, it was built by the Selby family as a dairy barn. They also had grain, and you can see the grain, not elevators, what are they called? Grain. Thank you. You know, some words just evaporate. So, well maintained, and the gambrel roof, the little windows so the cows could look out while they were in their stalls and get some fresh air and so forth. And then we'll go to the next barn. This is the Larimore barn, And this is down the street from those other, the double red barns that were on County Road 14. The red ones were the father, this one was the son, John Larimore. And unfortunately, it's not used, it is neglected, and it is on the Routt County Register. And maybe one day we can work with the owners, hint, hint, to do something wonderful with it, because it's such a place on the landscape. So moving on, we have a couple more stories, and that is, here's a lovely picture of the Larimore barn, lovely quilt, which is great to see. And then this one is on County Road 14. It was owned by Bill and Dorothy Thorne for many years. Some of you might have known them. And they raised Devon cows. So they were the only ones who did so in the valley, and it was such a treat to get milk and butter from them and to get eggs, because Dorothy also had eggs. So that barn is beautifully restored now, although this picture is from before that time. And so now we move to the next chapter, which is barns transformed. You know, when barns are no longer used the way they are, when agriculture changes, what do you do? And so ag operators have come up with different ideas. We move to the next one, the pole barn. And the pole barn is inexpensive, easy to put up. You can put a lot of hay in there. You can put your big equipment in there and get it somewhat covered and protected. And then there's the plastic barn. You know, will that barn last 100 years? Not sure. Will it last 50 years? I don't know. You know, but this is what we have popping up on the landscape, kind of like mushrooms after a rain. So, and then we have the metal barn, Morton Buildings. And when I was writing my thesis on barns, I was innocently disparaging the Morton barns, and then I realized that my thesis advisor had a couple. Oh boy! But she was still. And then here is the transformed barn, the way that makes our hearts sing. And this is a barn, interestingly, I think it was originally owned by Leonard Fisher, and then the construction was finished by Dick Randolph. These are names those of you know. And it is now the home to the Kakala Holmbein family, transformed into a magical place and setting. And, you know, very welcoming. And you see the river cobble foundation, the big Gothic roof that originally held a lot of hay, and now holds happy families. So, and then here is the next transformation. Interestingly, there's a great story about this barn. This barn was built around 1910. It was owned by Count Lacosta. Count Lacosta lived here for many years. He was a very savvy investor. He was Russian, I understand. He built this barn, and then after some time, maybe Routt County winters got to him, and he moved to Denver and invested in apartment buildings. However, this barn was saved. It was owned by many other families after he left. I think the Kemry was the last agricultural family. But then David Lindau bought it, and he started the Pine Grove Restaurant in 1971, which could be the oldest continuously operated restaurant in Steamboat Springs as of that time. I can't think of any others that are older. And it's a wonderful restaurant. And you go inside and there are historic photos and great food and all sorts of ephemera. So what I do when I have out-of-town guests, I take them on a mini barn tour. And the mini barn tour starts by, let me go to the next one. Okay, you see this. This is a recent story. I think many of you know the story of the Arnold barn that was called the Butterfly Barn, that was called many other things. But this was in the Meadows parking lot at the base of the ski area, languishing in wetlands for many years. And historic Routt County and many others in the community rallied to save it so that it's now the Arnold Barn. And it was moved up the hill, and it's now a landmark and a wayfinding place so that people can know, when you get to the barn, do I go right or left? And it also celebrates the history of the Arnold family and agriculture and so forth. So my barn tour, and you can do this with your relative or whoever is visiting. You can either start at the Arnold Barn, go down Mount Werner Road, go over to the Steamboat Barn where there's a place to park. So there are signs here to tell them what's what. Then there's a sign for the Steamboat Barn, it's like less than a mile away. You can explain that. And then when you're hungry and tired and thirsty, and if you time it right, at 4 o'clock you can go over to the Orr House and the Pine Grove and the La Custa Barn and have a lovely meal. So there you have it. I'll entertain questions.
Arianthe, what defines a barn? Is it the shape? What's the difference between a barn and, say, a shed? Is it because of the roof, or is it because it's a working building? What is a barn?
I think a couple of things, in my mind, define a barn. Usually, in an ag headquarters or an ag operation, it's the largest building on the site. So when you see a little barn, what do you think? I think tough shed. But usually it's large, it's commodious, and usually it's a place for animals and ag implements and grains and that type of storage, tack, and maybe a place for chickens, like the Larimore barn had a special room in it for chickens and so forth. So it's more size and use. It's not, is the roof like this? And I forgot to put a picture in of the Camaletti barn that has the big Gothic rounded roof, and the story of the Holly barn, Diane, the Hitchens place. That started out as a little modest one-story handmade, hand-hewn log building. And just before, like in the 20s, the family knew that they needed more hay, and they added this gargantuan Gothic rounded roof because the technology had been developed to create a large roof that they could still support the snow. So, it's more how it's used, I'd say, but size and use. And shed sounds little, tool shed, milk shed,
But a
etc.
pole barn doesn't have that traditional look of what you think of as a traditional barn, but it's referred to as a barn, pole barn.
There is no, how you say, there are no hard and fast rules. If that person thinks of it as a barn, if it makes them happy, let them have it. Other questions? Yes.
I'm curious, since some of the Swiss settled here and built barns, did we ever have any of the combo barns that are part house attached to the cattle side? As they do over there, they do in Pennsylvania and some places?
Right. What I have read historically is that many early settlers, when they came, the first building they built was the barn. And then they might have lived upstairs and sheltered their animals downstairs, but that was a temporary situation. It was nothing like the European barns where they did in fact have their animals permanently downstairs and then their living quarters upstairs. And so there's nothing like that these days that I'm aware of.
That's how they heated their houses. The animal body heat would heat the house.
It makes a lot of sense. You just had to have the certain aroma. didn't have a good picture of it. It's a barn typical of the southeast. It's called a double crib barn. And what it is, it's just one story. It looks like two cabins built here with a continuous roof over them and a breezeway in between. And so if you see one, there's one as you're driving up Elk River Road on the left side. It's on the top of the hill. It's looking a little sad these days, but it is the only double crib barn that I'm aware of here. So,
Thank you so much.
oh, you're welcome.
I do want to just say before we depart that the impetus for today's talk was inspired by our local Quilters Guild. They're celebrating their 30th anniversary this year, and they did a challenge, and the theme was to design these miniature quilts that feature local barns. So on your way out, please stop and take a look at those quilts. And we did invite, where are you? Right here. Terry, Hetty is going to talk a little bit about the guild just for a moment, since we're all ready to be out of this small space.
I know you've been sitting for a long while, so I will make this short. I'm Hetty Davis. I'm president of the Delectable Mountain Quilters Guild here in Steamboat. We meet every the third Thursday of every month at 6:30 at the community center. So anyone who has an interest in quilting or quilts, please join us sometime. The only months we don't meet are August because of the Routt County Fair, and December, which is kind of self-explanatory. Our guild started in 1994 with a woman named Beth Sauterquist. I don't know if anyone, she still lives here in the community. And it was 7 women who started it between Steamboat, Hayden, and Craig. And we have 68 members today. And as part of our 30th anniversary, well, for our 20th anniversary, we did A River Runs Through It. And they were quilted pictures of the Yampa River and the Yampa Valley. And maybe some of you saw them on display at the Art Depot. And I think they were out at the airport also for a while. So for our 30th anniversary, we came up with the challenge of making quilts of the barns in the county. And as you were told, many of them are on display. We have a few members who are still working on theirs to get theirs done. But they were labors of love, and we were all so happy the way they turned out. So please enjoy them. We have many members of the guild here today. Raise your hand if you're a guild member. Yep. So we've really enjoyed making those, and I hope you enjoy seeing them. And with that, I'll kind of wrap up my remarks. If you have any questions, see me afterwards. Thank you.